Hey guys, so this is my review of The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1. And I know it doesn't matter what I say about this film because it is making a ton of money, so chances are you've probably either already seen it or you're going to go see it regardless. But I'm going to review it anyway, so tough luck. And I guess general rule is whenever reviewing a film that's part of a franchise and you haven't reviewed the other ones, I think it is only fair that you do talk about the previous installments, if only briefly. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to share with you my quick thoughts on the first two Hunger Games films. This one I thought was really average in terms of a book adaptation, but as a general standalone feature, I thought it works really well. I think if you just went in there, not having read the book, you're going to have a great time. I thought it was great, and I also really liked the modesty factor to it, because since it has a smaller budget than the other ones, it downplays it quite a bit, and I thought that worked really well in terms of translating how the first Hunger Games book was written. And at times it even felt like an independent film, which I think suited this first installment really well. Catching Fire I liked a bit better, but for slightly different reasons from most other people. Most other people say it was better because of a bigger budget and a better director. I don't entirely think that's true. I think that the two stories need two different directing styles. So basically, if you had Francis Lawrence directing The Hunger Games, it wouldn't have worked so well. And if you had Gary Ross directing Catching Fire, it wouldn't have worked so well either. Same thing with the bigger budget. I think that Catching Fire calls for something that's grand in scale, large in scope, something that's overly flashy. Hence, a bigger budget is necessary. But for The Hunger Games, not very so. And I think it benefited from having a smaller budget. But Catching Fire, I loved. I thought it was put to screen brilliantly. It was entertaining from start to finish, despite a slow first act. But I thought it was just as good, if not better, than the book. And now that brings us to Mockingjay Part 1. And Mockingjay Part 1 continues directly after Catching Fire, like abruptly so. You are just thrown straight in there. And Katniss Everdeen has now been chosen to be the face of a rebellion against the Capitol. Basically, what they're going to do is make their way to the Capitol, start an uprising, and take them all down. But before they can do that, they have to make one first trip to the Capitol and take back all the tributes from the 75th Hunger Games, that was in Catching Fire, who have now been taken prisoner by the Capitol. And I'm going to start off with the performances, because they are great across the board. Every actor and actress in this has their moment to shine, and everyone was basically on the same page in terms of performances. I mean, there were even some surprises in there. I was particularly impressed and surprised by the strong performances delivered by both Natalie Dormer and Liam Avocado Face Hemsworth. I mean, come on, just look at his face. It looks like an avocado. But the real standouts were definitely Donald Sutherland, Woody Harrelson and Julianne Moore, who give really rich, really detailed and very accurate depictions of their characters. The action sequences are also very consistent and for the most part superbly done. Some of them even verge on breathtaking because they get more intense as they go along when it reaches a definitive climax that I was even astounded by. And they are all necessary too, because there are a lot of action scenes in here, but they are all in there for a reason. And it's hard to explain, but they are very different from your standard action scenes in Hollywood blockbusters nowadays. They're different, but they're still very interesting to watch. And considering that this is another one of those books split into two movies, or part one of two, it did a very good job at making it feel like a standalone feature, unlike Harry Potter, which didn't really build up to a climax and delivered a screw you cliffhanger at the end. This one doesn't do that. It reaches an action climax, it has a main plot that gets resolved, even though it does still have its own bigger plot that spans for 2 movies. And it has a proper ending/conclusion. It still ends on a cliffhanger, but it's mild, and it doesn't distract, and it's no more of a cliffhanger than the previous 2 movies. But what really lets this film down is that it is really, really slow. I thought that the first half of Catching Fire was slow, but this movie trods along at a noticeably slow pace and feels much longer than it actually is. The film is the shortest of the 3, at 2 hours and 5 minutes. This one feels like 2 hours and 30 minutes. And from reading the books, I know that this probably should be the slowest paced one, but it shouldn't be this slow. I mean, come on. And a smaller problem is that it didn't really do a good job at building the world in which it is set in. Well, not a good enough job, at least. Vast majority of the film is set in District 13 because District 12 has now been destroyed and it's in ruins. And unfortunately, I think that the director was too focused on showing the futuristic elements of this world rather than the elements of the poor, worse than ever District 13. I mean, it was distracting and I couldn't get a good enough grasp of what District 13 was like now. I mean, watching the scenes in the hideout spots of District 13, I was just looking at these cool futuristic gizmos and I was thinking, like, wow, if this is the worst it gets, sign me up! It definitely was distracting and I couldn't get a good enough feel of the tragedy in which these characters were in. And now that brings us to the 1-sentence review. More a penultimate feature than part 1 of a conclusion, this action cinema spectacular is bogged down by an excessive slow pace. I was debating about whether to give this 3.5 stars or 4 stars out of 5, but I think just because of those special action sequences and how it's really something that you do need to see in the cinema rather than on DVD, I'm going to give it 4 stars. So I definitely would recommend Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1, definitely in the case of if you just feel like going to the movies as a spur of the moment sort of thing with some friends. I would say that's definitely the film to go to. Well, either that or Gone Girl, because Gone Girl was kick-ass. So either one of those 2, but I would probably recommend Mockingjay Part 1 a little bit more, especially in that case at least. Because Interstellar, whilst I did like it a bit more than this one, I think it's something you need to make the time for and is something you definitely need to be in the mood for. Also Fury, which I saw on Friday, I think that's definitely something you need to be in the mood for as well. And then Whiplash, which I'd implore you go see, is barely showing anywhere anymore. So yeah, recommendation is Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1 if you just feel like going to the movies with some friends. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm Thomas and that's a review.